good morning, or as Mihajlo said, good afternoon to some of you. Welcome everyone to the day 2 of the Southeast European User Forum. For those that missed yesterday's presentation, you should not worry. Slides are already there at the website and the recordings will be soon available on the events page. We use the events page as a repository for all the materials or all the videos that we'll record on this event. With the risk of a little bit of repeating myself, I would like just to say that the Southeast European User Forum is a joint event organized by GÉANT and its partner relations team, along with the projects like NIFOS Europe, the regional EOSC contributing project, as well as the EOSC Future, the biggest pan-European EOSC financed effort. All of them seeking toward the same mutual goal, making the open science the right way to do science. Yesterday, we had a full day of interesting talks, from the added value of EOSC to the researchers, to how NRENs can help achieve it, and what the EOSC Future brings to the future of EOSC. We also spoke about GÉANT research engagement and showcased some interesting resources and services for open science brought to you by NIFOS Europe. Today, we'll be focusing mostly on the authentication authorization infrastructure, or even more general, handling of digital identities in the research and education community. Before we begin, I would like just to walk you once more through the house rules of this meeting. The event is recorded, the videos and the presentation will be there on the event page. All participants, especially the speakers, are encouraged to turn on their cameras. Please keep your mics muted during the presentation, with the exception of the speaker, of course, and the participants can unmute themselves during each of the Q&A sessions and where you can speak up your questions. Also, we encourage you to use the Zoom chat to post questions during the presentations. So, saying this, I would like to say that we are very happy to have us today Marina Adomeit from the Swedish NREN, who leads the GÉANT's project Trust and Identity Work Package, to explain us more on why we need those identities and present us with some very interesting use cases. Marina.
Yes, thank you very much, Anastas, and thanks to you, Marina, for inviting me. It is certainly a pleasure. And I will try to do a justice into explaining, first of all, what are the concepts behind identities in research and education. You will hear that a lot today from me. You will also hear a lot of term federation and federated, and I will try to explain that as much as possible. And I will also bring up some of the use cases of why and how we use those identity in the research and education community. Please, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. I will try to address them during my talk or after, or I think we have the Q&A section in the end of the session, and I will hang around to answer those. So I hope you see my presentation now. So a little bit about the agenda. As I said before, I will talk and explain the concepts of federated identities in the research and education. Then I will introduce what is needed to enable their usage also in between institutions on the national level and on the global level. And finally, I will try to do justice also to talk about some of the groupings of use cases. There are certainly many where research and education identities are important and enabling factor for users to actually use the services. But I will try to at least mention some main groups and try to make this more approachable to you and why this is so important. So to start, first of all, what is the problem that we are solving here? Well, this problem is very old. It is as old as the need to solve users' access to digital services. And first concepts of federated identity, I think, are almost 2 decades old, I would say. So with first digital or electronic services that were provided to the users, of course, there was immediate need to identify who is using the service and also which access right they have when they access the service. So at the very beginning, applications started to develop their own login solutions. Typically, they started opening accounts for the users locally within the application. And this worked fine for a certain amount of time. However, as more and more services started to appear, each of the services started to register their users. Very soon, this was shown to be an approach which is not efficient at all. Depending when the user comes from, it's not always easy for application and application admin to figure out how to register the user and how to make sure that their identity was proved in the right way. Also, as users leave their institution, for example, as they complete their study, it gets very difficult to update the status in all the different applications that were in the beginning separately maintaining credentials for users to log into that applications. Also, this approach is very difficult to the users as well, as I believe many of us also still experience from time to time. So we are asked sometimes to create accounts in different applications. We have to manage those accounts. We have to manage the passwords. Typically, this means that users choose the same passwords or very simple passwords, which is not very safe. And again, if a password gets compromised, it's very difficult to remember where all it's used and to go to all of these systems and to update the password. So very fast, it was shown that this way of managing access to services isn't very efficient when we start offering more and more services. So to solve this problem, let's go back for a minute to the beginning and try to define the roles. So institutions in research and education are the entities with which users have the relationship with. It is where they work or where they study. So institutions are actually the ones that can register their user. Typically when a person is employed or student is enrolled, they collect basic information about the users. They provide to them credentials for logging into different systems. Typically this is username and password. So this basic information about the user, so their name, email, affiliation with the institution, whether they're a student, they're employed, or they have some other relationship with the institution, and together with their credentials, which are typically username and password for login, this is all what constitutes an identity of a user. And we say in RNE because these are tied to a specific institution in research and education domain, and it carries the information about affiliation of the user with that particular institution. Now, there is another role of the institutions, and this is to not only to register the user, to manage their identities, but also to provide a method for them to log in and to offer this not only for local services, but also for the services to use which are outside of their domain. Then we have a second role, which are the services. They rely on institutional issued identities and enable users to log in with those. And finally, we have users such as students and researchers. So again, they are affiliated with a particular institution, they get their identity in that institution, and they can use it to access different services. And all of this has a very important benefit, and this really improves the user experience. Because user has one identity, they log into their institution. I will show you the flow. This is a known process for them. It is also a way to increase the security and the privacy of the user, because now we are not in the solution where identities are all separate, maintained by different applications, but they are really maintained at the entity with which the user has a relationship with. So to try to demystify this a little bit, I just wanted to show you how a typical user journey flow would look when a user is using their identity in research and education to access different services. So the journey always starts from a service where the user needs to access. Here I have put a print screen of a wiki pages. So these wiki pages surely have some content which is open that I can read, but me as a user probably have access to some restricted area of the wiki. I also need to log in if I'm able at all to edit the pages, so I'll have to log into the service. So I would basically click on the login button, which is typically on the upper right corner. And then what happens in the scenario of using federated identities in the research and education? Well, I have to let the service know from which institutions I'm coming. So basically, this all happens in the user browser. User will be redirected to so-called institution discovery service. And there, user needs to type in the name of their institution. And basically, a searchable interface will be there. Here I had an example of typing Stockholm University. It will pop out in the list of available institutions, and I would click on my institution there. The next step is that the user is redirected to their institution to log in. So now they're in the known territory. They're in their university or institution where they work. They look at their familiar login screen of their institution, and they know that they should log in with their username and password. So when this is done, if the user was successfully authenticated, we say, sorry, just a little bit of technical expression. So this is the process of authentication, authenticating the user. Basically, the user's institution would send back to the service that user started from the information, yes, this user was successfully authenticated or not. And typically it would send some user information, very brief information that service might have requested, such as my name, my email, and of course my identifier, because the service needs to be able to uniquely identify the user. And here you can see an example where I have successfully logged in. In the upper right corner, there is no more login button. There is my profile picture, which means I am logged in. And this is basically how the user flow looks like. So starting from the service, choosing the institution, login and the institution, and going back to the service as authenticated user. One important thing also to mention then that on top of this, the whole authentication protocol that we use in the background to enable this also enables so-called single sign-on. What this means? Well, basically this means that the institution, when I log in as a user at my institution, it will maintain a session through which my login is valid. Typically, this is something that institutions can configure. Typically, it is one working day, which means that during my working day, when I start working, I will go through this whole process for the first service. Then I will have my valid or authenticated session at the identity provider. For the next service I access, basically I would go through the same steps, go to the service, go to my institution. But since I'm already authenticated, basically I wouldn't need to again enter my username and password. So this part would come automatically. So it's a matter of clicks for a user to get to the service and to get authenticated. And this is, if you hear single sign-on, this is what actually it means. So I hope that with this it's clear now what federated identities are in research and education, what are the roles, and how this works in the relationship in between the institution and the service provider. Now we need to elaborate on that concept a bit. So what is needed to actually bring up this concept beyond an institution? So here we have a picture where we have a domain of an institution. We have users which are affiliated to the institution. Institution issues their identities to the users. There are services which are offered in the domain of an institution. However, when we talk about federation, we talk about federating those identities, which means making those identities available also for services which are outside of the domain of the institution to be used as well. And this is the true and real value of this. There are a lot of cases of this. I will talk about it later. But for example, on a more national level, there can be services offered such as video conferencing or different collaboration tools, or simply institution uses learning management system which are offered by another provider. So we need to extend the reach of that identity to be used not only within the institution, but also to be used by different services which are offered also outside of the domain of that institution. So to enable this, we introduce the concept of the identity federation. So Identity Federation basically enabled the use of RNE entities across the service, typically in a national domain. They define the policy and the rules for institutions and services to participate in Identity Federation. Typically, those are the ones bound to research and education sector. They also define technical rules for interoperability, and they enable certain services, I will not get into details, but certain services on interinstitutional level are needed actually to make the whole authentication to work. And what is also important, and probably the most important, is they are the trust anchor for services institutions. So they define the rules, they manage the membership, they make sure that all the participants are basically following the policies and different best practices within the federation so that everything can work as seamlessly as possible for the user. Now, as I said, identity federations are typically built on a national level. They're typically operated by NRENs. Nowadays, identity federation services is something that NREN recognizes core of their service offering. So this is really something which is next to offering a network, because it is next type of services needed to enable access to any other services above the net, if you will. So all of these services need some kind of way to for you to identify the users. So the identity federation services are in that matter sometimes even a long time before referred such as the middleware services, but they're really the enabler. Once we have a network, the enabler to actually access services that are offered above the network. So here you can see that these are the European identity federations operated by NRENs. They're usually branded, they have their own name, their own brand name. So this is all the brand names of different federations, mostly in Europe in this picture. Now, what is on top of that? So how do we actually then enable global usage of that? How do we make this work internationally? So here is where GÉANT offers two infrastructure services to enable this for two different use cases. And those are eduroam and eduGAIN. It would be interesting if I can see a show of hands. I guess not many of you have heard about eduGAIN, because this is a brand name which is, I showed you the flow that would use this, but it's not very visible to the user. But eduroam is something that we see because this is federating access to Wi-Fi. So if you can raise your hands, I'm curious to see if some of you heard of eduroam or have used eduroam. But eduroam is one of the services that is relying on the federated identities. Oh, I see hands, that's good. Excellent. So basically, eduroam is very well scoped, very well defined service. It is access to Wi-Fi network. This is what users see. So basically, when they go to visit another institution, if institution has eduroam deployed, they will basically see eduroam network. They would have installer on their device that is configured to safely connect to eduroam and use their federated identity basically in the background seamlessly and invisible to the user in the end to log in their own institution and to prove to the institution that they're visiting that they're indeed a user coming from research and education sector and they can access the eduroam network. The second big global service is called eduGAIN. It relies on national identity federations to actually enable access to web services. So these are all the wikis, Zooms, learning management systems, and many more that I will show later. But basically, we have kind of these two groups around using identities in research and education, and this is access to Wi-Fi through the eduroam globally and access to web services through eduGAIN globally. Now, just to show you a little bit how that global maps look like. I'll start from the right side. So eduroam is now available in over 106 countries. There are over 8,600 institutions participating in eduroam as institutions that are providing their users with federated identity to use eduroam. And there are globally over 32,000 Wi-Fi locations where users can use eduroam. Eduroam is there for, I think, almost 2 decades, 15 years, almost 15 years, I think. We celebrated 10 years of eduroam a couple of years ago. And you can see that it does have a larger spread than eduGAIN. So we just celebrated in April this year 10 years of eduGAIN as a global service. But identity federations nationally, some identity federations actually are even older and exist before this international collaboration was established, so even older than that. But eduGAIN is now available in more than 17 countries. We have over 4,400 institutions, and there are over 3,400 web services which are available through eduGAIN. Okay, so this was my introduction to federated identities and to actually what we need to enable the usage of them nationally and internationally and how this works. Now, the last bit of my presentation is to try to introduce to you some groups of services and use cases where federated identities are important and where we use them. So the first group of services I grouped as collaboration tools. So those are all different tools such as access to video conferencing. This is something that we cannot imagine our daily routine right now without. And if we are to actually own a Zoom room or which other web room and have some privileges other than guests, we need to log into those systems. Then the learning management systems. A lot of universities are relying on that. They need to be able to identify who are the lecturers, who are the students. They need to have proper access rights because lecturers and students shouldn't be able to do the same things. So it is very important that there is proper authentication, but also authorization implemented in learning management systems. Then there are a lot of file storing and sharing services that also need to enable users to identify the users and to enable them to log in. There are services that are organized on a national level, such as digital exams. There are even a lot of countries that are moving on to organizing digital exams to enroll to higher education institutions on a national level. And there is also a particular need to have very good and safe identification of the user. So these are all the group of collaboration tools that would be basically impossible to offer, especially in interinstitutional and national level, if you don't have identities in research and education that we can rely on. The second group of services is around the student mobility. Maybe to see a rise of hands, how many of you know about student mobility and the programs in your country? Yeah, I think it's a very well spread and known use case, and this is truly international use case. So Erasmus program is the program that manages student mobility on the European level. And basically what they introduced or started doing a couple of years ago is saying, okay, we want to start doing this in fully digitalized process. They started Erasmus without paper, which means that, well, basically from this year, students can apply for student mobility programs only on an online and digital form. So this means that they needed to easily, safely identify and register electronically in higher education institutions when they move abroad for studies. And of course, they needed to identify the students and of course, the research and education identities came into play in this. There are many countries, I think around 30, that participate in the Erasmus program in Europe. Almost 6,000 institutions participate. So this is now very important, actually, use case for many countries and institutions to support if they want to continue supporting their students to go to mobility programs. So basically, what was established here is a platform called My Academic ID, which connects the different services from the mobility program of Erasmus. And through the process, regardless of the flow, these services need to receive a consistent representation of the student and also the student records. So basically, this is all enabled now through eduGAIN and uses federated identities in research and education. Also, one important thing to mention here, and I will also talk about it later, and this is a very interesting use case where also beyond research and education identities, the national IDs have been brought into the picture. So users or students can also use their national IDs within the platform, because their national IDs are holding the information of their identity as a citizen of a particular country. But again, we cannot do the whole process without identities in research and education, because the campuses, the universities are the only one which are carrying the information if that particular user is studying in their university. So we need to combine these pieces of information, and this is what is now available in My Academic ID platform. And I will have a little slide in the very end to show this. So the next group of services I already mentioned, this is the Wi-Fi access, which is globally available through the eduroam service. Now, additional group of services that appeared in the last couple of years or became more prominent are commercial services. So there are a lot of services beyond purely research and education that offer specialized, tailored offerings or discounts to students. You may know, if you go and shop online, there are many of those that offer student discounts. How they did that so far? So not very well. Many of them implemented not really reliable or not privacy-preserving methods. They ask students to upload their student records or to prove their studentness. And this actually puts students in a very vulnerable position where they have to expose much more private information about them and not just yes or no, I am the student. So in order to connect this kind of commercial services in an easy way for them and in an easy way also for the institutions and the end users, there is the Academia, which is also a service offered by GÉANT, which brings those commercial services through a single interface and enables them to use federated identities, and basically returns only information, yes or no, this person is a student, or no, this person is not a student. And in this way, our users are much more protected with regards to the privacy, because no other information is, they're not asked to reveal other information about them in order to prove that they're students. And again, the natural place or the holders of this information are the institutions where the users are studying. The next group of services are around scientific articles and publishers. So again, a rise of hands to see if this is a use case that you recognize. This is typically differently organized within the countries. Sometimes there are central bodies which are procuring access to different scientific articles and publishers. Sometimes universities are buying or subscribing to that access themselves. It really depends on which kind of framework exists within the country. What was typically used up until, well, recently with COVID started, and everybody needed to move away from that model. Luckily, the work started before. So typically, they rely on IP-based access, which means that they would allow for users coming from an NREN network IP address space to access that content. Of course, this means that in the beginning, users could only access that content if they were sitting in their campuses. They couldn't do that work from their home. That there are different solutions which were employed to enable them through so-called easy proxies. Some of them may hurt, but all of them pretty unflexible. And actually, this is a really important use case where identities in research and education could be used. This is something that has started to change in the last couple of years through different initiatives, and more publishers are moving onto the space of actually enabling access through using identities in research and education. I think that one important driving moment was COVID, where research needed to continue, and they were just pushed to do things maybe more faster, and there are more publishers which are now enabling this. Also more streamlined user experience than it was done before. Next use case is around compute resources and high performance computing. What again we are seeing in developments over the last years is that HPC sites are also moving into the more federated environment. So while some of them are still operating in an environment where they have their own users and they have their own ways of managing identities, HPC sites are federating between themselves, sharing their resources, and they need to be able to identify the users across Europe and globally. So many of them are already or moving into using federated identities. I've put an example of one of that collaboration, which is Phoenix. Another very important and use case also politically is the EuroHPC joint undertaking, because they have invested a lot together with the member countries of Europe to actually procure 7 supercomputers across Europe. And those are Lumi in Finland, which you can see here in the slide, but also Leonardo in Italy. And they are also in Luxembourg, in Slovenia, in Czech Republic, Bulgaria, and Portugal. And they're not only meant to be used within their countries, so some of them are consortiums and actually include the usage of more countries other than the ones that I just mentioned. I put here Lumi because this is the one which is the fastest in the implementation. Lumi supercomputer in Finland is now fully installed. I know this because I'm working on the project of enabling the AI to access to Lumi resources. Access to Lumi resources is enabled fully through eduGAIN and through federated identity providers. And they fully rely on users coming to use Lumi supercomputing to bring in their federated identity from research and education, and to use that actually to enable them the access to supercomputer. And I believe that also the other supercomputer centers will move into the same direction. And finally, the niche, a little bit of the niche, and those are the European research infrastructures. I say it's a niche because typically those research projects have researchers which are coming from many institutions across Europe. And this is the use case that we also need to support by enabling them to use their identities from their institutions from research and education. Here I've put some of the areas of and thematic areas on research infrastructures. So the social science and humanities is SSHOC, EOSC Life is for biological and medical research, PANOSC is the photon and neutron community, Eurofusion is the fusion for energy research, ESCAPE is astronomy and particle physics, NRENs is environmental research, but there are many of those thematic ones. And again, they have different projects. They have researchers participating from all over Europe and globally. They have different infrastructure that these researchers need to access. And again, the answer how they access, how they log in to that services is through their identities coming from research and education. So this was all on the use cases. I have one very last slide that I was asked from Marina and Anastas to mention. And this is, of course, to mention how EIDAS and EIDs are actually coming into play and how this can be used together with identities in research and education. So services require to know both who is a person. And this is something that national EIDs through EIDAS can do very reliably, because the level of assurance of those identities or the trustworthiness of that identities is very high. And this is a strength that these identities bring. However, services also need to know that this institution is coming, that this user is coming from research and education sector, and that they're affiliated to a particular institution that they're studying or working, or they're a researcher. This is something that EID, national EID is not carrying. And this is something that needs to come from the identities in the research and education, because they are the ones that have academic affiliation, because it's only the institution where the user is registered at or studies or is working actually can claim the affiliation of that user with that particular institution and can say which kind of affiliation it is. What we have been doing is that we have been monitoring the space around EIDAS deployment and EIDs. And the first use case where we actually have implemented the connector in between, I mentioned before. This is my academic ID, which serves for connecting services to enable student mobility. So actually here you have a little picture which says a user coming from, for example, Spain can use their Spanish EID to identify themselves, but in order to prove that they are coming from a particular institution and are, for example, a student from a particular university in Spain, then they use their research and education identity. And by combining these two, we get a strong authentication and identification of the user, but of course also the information that the user is coming from particular higher ed institution. So this was all from me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina. Thank you for your thorough presentation. We are a little bit over time, but it was very useful, I think, for our audience, since you laid out it very nicely. And I hope that our audience now better understand the federated identities in the research and education world. Please stick around for the Q&A sessions. We have still the discussion to do. We'll continue now with our colleague Aristos Anastasiou, the senior security engineer from the Cyprus NREN, who will speak about the coping with the increased interest for the federated identities within the research and education community in Cyprus. Aristos.
Yes, hello everybody. Let me start my screen sharing. Give me a moment, please.
We see your presentation fine. Yeah.
You can see, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good morning to you all. Thank you, Anastas, for the introduction. And Marina, your presentation was excellent in regarding to the question, why do you need identities in RNE? As mentioned by Anastas, I'm Aristos Anastasiou. I'm a senior network security engineer at Cynet, at the Cyprus NREN. And today I'm going to present to you the challenges that Cynet faced for implementing a central federated solution for identity management and the roadmap we use to pull this off. Of course, we'll be discussing about eduGAIN. The agenda for today is as follows. We're going to have a brief introduction about Cynet, the Cyprus NREN. I will briefly present the Erasmus Plus program. This is the main reason why all higher institutions in Cyprus were, let's say, forced to adopt the eduGAIN solution for the identification of the students and the faculty staff. A short look up into eduGAIN, the interfederation service that connects identity federations around the world, simplifying access to content, services, and resources. It is provided by GÉANT, of course. We'll have a look at the challenges that Cynet faced for the adoption of eduGAIN and the steps we used in order to make this happen. A brief introduction of Cynet. Cynet is Cyprus National Research and Education Network, the NREN, and provides a network infrastructure for the Cypriot research and education community by connecting educational and research institutions. Some of the services Cynet offers, I'm not going to list all of them, this would take a bit of long time, but for indication, I will mention a few of them. Cynet is an internet provider with direct links to the institutions and to GÉANT's backbone network with high-speed bandwidth and low latency. We offer federated services such as eduGAIN, eduTeams inter alia. We offer cybersecurity incident response services from our own CSERT, digital certificates and support, including Network Operations Center, technical knowledge, training, and etc. We're going to discuss about the Erasmus Plus, which was the program that for many years has promoted education, teaching youth and sport, and provided opportunities for educational mobility and cooperation, not only within the European Union, but and beyond. Today, by building on the advantages of the Federation and eduGAIN, Erasmus Plus offers new opportunities to promote the mobility of students, young graduates, and faculty staff. A bit about eduGAIN, we've seen in Marina's presentation a bit earlier. It's the interfederation service that connects identity federations around the world, simplifies the access to content, resources, and services for the global and research and education community. It compromises by over 70 participant federations. Cynet is one of them. Federations means countries, and connecting over more 8,000 of identity and service providers. It supports students, researchers, and staff. It helps nearly 27 million students, researchers, and educators access online services while minimizing the number of accounts users have to manage, reducing cost, complexity, and security risks. The service providers supports with eduGAIN participants over 3,500 identity providers. Service managers can simplify their account management and control process, allowing greater access at reduced costs. And of course, the institutions that eduGAIN enables institutions to easily and scalably support access to services globally, allowing control over user management. The Erasmus Plus application, we can freely express that the culmination of the digitalization of the Erasmus Plus program is undoubtedly the Erasmus Plus mobile application. It was created to provide a digital management center for the various administrative steps involved in an Erasmus students mobility period. I've dropped the link to their website if someone wants to check this out. Now, a paperless administrative process thanks to eduGAIN. In Cyprus, every member of the Cynet Identity Federation, we call it CIF, can easily join eduGAIN, as mentioned before, the transcontinental inter-federation project developed by GÉANT. CIF allows the possibilities of single sign-on to be extended abroad. The pioneering My Academic ID project, initiated by GÉANT in particular, is the expression of this extended principle adapted to the European academic world, laying the foundations of the digitalized path that the Erasmus Plus program is now taking. The aim of this project is to enable students to register in an electronically and securely manner at higher education institutes abroad, thus eliminating the need for extensive paper-based administrative procedures. Therefore, eduGAIN is a crucial element for the development of a paperless administration, inherent to the digitalization of student mobility promoted by Erasmus+. The challenges that we faced for implementing eduGAIN, what we had to take into consideration. In Cyprus, we have 32 institutions that are eligible for joining eduGAIN, so as to use the Erasmus application. It's worth mentioning that only one institution had adopted eduGAIN prior to the Erasmus without paper project. Secondly, not all institutions are in the same standing regarding the technical and non-technical requirements for joining eduGAIN. And thirdly, we had to take into consideration that the best solution was to offer a central federated access instead of creating standalone identity providers at each institution. What we used for the roadmap we used for the implementation, the first thing we had to address was to map the current status of each institution regarding the technical, meaning the IDPs, and the non-technical requirements. So we distributed a questionnaire to help us understand their status. We kept the questionnaire a bit simple in regards to the questions and the information needed to have, because there are not only large universities with equipment and the appropriate knowledge, but some small institutions as well that are not up to the large universities. Out of the 32 institutions, we only had a reply from 26, meaning around 80% only got back to us. We started with categorization. We categorized the institutions in 3 categories. I put in bracket 4 categories. The 4th is not actually a category, but it was the ones that did not respond back to us. The first category was institutions that had the infrastructure and the technical knowledge for joining eduGAIN. The second category was the institutions that had the infrastructure, but did not have the technical knowledge, so Cynet would provide their expertise for helping them joining eduGAIN. The third category was institutions that had neither the infrastructure nor the technical knowledge, so Cynet would provide some help in regards with the equipment requirements and training regarding the configuration that was needed for joining. And category 4, as I mentioned, it's not actually a category. It was the ones that did not respond to our questionnaire, to our call. After the categorizations of the institutions, we started with category 1. All of the institutions in this category joined the CIF, the National Federation of Cynet, as we mentioned earlier, in a week's time. Category 2, which is an ongoing process, is joining CIF after the technical support we provide them in regards to the configuration of their metadata and their attribute releases by their Active Directories. Remember that in this category belongs institutions that have the equipment but lacking technical knowledge. And the category 3, which is still on the whitelist, they cannot use eduGAIN for the Erasmus+, but they use something called identification of the last resort. This was a workaround until they have the necessary equipment and knowledge for joining eduGAIN. We have in a snapshot the institutions that were removed from the whitelist. All of these institutions have their IDP working, and they are member of CIF Federation, Cyprus. I dropped the link below if someone wants to check this out for their own institution. And on the next slide, we have the institutions that are still in the whitelist. Remember, it's only for Cyprus, this list. They will be in this list until they meet all the requirements for joining eduGAIN. Then they will be served by the IDP as a last resort, as we mentioned before. And now for the last slide from me, this is a snapshot of our C Federation. It contains the institutions that joined and are using eduGAIN, not only for the Erasmus Plus and application. We have managed to make them centrally managed, and everything is done centrally, and the administration is a bit simpler. Thank you. That was it from me. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to present to Southeast European Forum, and I will happily answer any question in the session.
Thank you, Aristos, for sharing the Cypriot experience with us. Please stick around for the Q&A session after the next presentation. We are still on the topic. We'll continue with Dubravko Penezic, the head of eduroam services at SRCE, the University Supercomputing of the University of Zagreb, who will tell us about one of the most advanced eduID national networks in the region. Dubravko.
Oh, okay, I think right now it's working. Good morning to everyone. I would like to present you creation, authentication, and authorization infrastructure. First of all, thanks Marina for defining some terms and acronyms I will use today. And now I would like to show you how we start and what was the journey from beginning to these days. First, in the latest 90s, we started with Whois++. Basically, we would like to give our user possibility to find email addresses. Next, in 2001, we found that Whois++ is not good decision for using for directory services, and we moved from Whois++ to LDAP. It's that in that time, Microsoft and Netscape decided to implement LDAP client in their browser. So for Whois++, you will need separate clients, and that is not convenient for users. Next, in 2002, we have some issue with modem entries. That is basically in the days standard way for connecting to the internet. We have some old application and we would like to use the new protocols Radius, and we found that LDAP is a good way to do authentication with Radius. So we move from TACAX++ and Oracle database to new ecosystem which include Radius and LDAP. In 2003, eduroam arrives on Terena Network Conference in Zagreb, and we decide that eduroam authentication way is good to use for our users. And also in that situation, we have Radius and LDAP authentication services on the place. So implementing the eduroam authentication is very simple. 2005, we found we are in the situation that we have a lot of web application which need authentication and authorization, and every of those web application use their own authentication system. So user have a lot of username and the passwords on the place, and that is not way we would like to have. So we start with implementing authentication and authorization infrastructure using single sign-on. The first try was using CAS system, which was basically implemented only on one institution. And after those, we found that SSO is nice thing to use, and we start federated approach. So 2005, basically, we started with SSO authentication and authorization infrastructure. To be more compatible and to build the trust, we start first audit of our IDPs to see if the IDPs follow the rules, how to give the username, how to give credential to users, how to raise security of the data, and so on. So first audit we did in 2010. 2014, we connect to another authentication authorization infrastructure based on government authentication and authorization infrastructure called NIAS. 2017, we connect to EIDAS, and 2020, we implement OIDC. So our name is AI at eduHIR, Authentication and Authorization Infrastructure of Science and Higher Education in Croatia. We are hub and spoke federation architecture. That means that from one point we represent all of our IDPs in Croatia. So basically you will see only AI at eduHIR like IDP in international world or on service provider side. We have 232 IDPs, almost 770,000 active users. For web-based authentication, we have 736 service provider. For network-based service provider for authentication, we have almost 100. I must say that on network-based service provider, we have eduroam mostly to authenticate wireless and wired networks, mostly on student dormitory. We are also connected to the eduGAIN and the NIAS, like service providers and IDP providers. And also on same time, we accept additional authentication via social network and other partners. What we provide to our community. First, information and support. So we have our website and the wiki with the information about our authentication and authorization infrastructure. Like user, you may go to the information how the authentication authorization work, what you need to implement that type of authentication authorization, what type of authentication protocols we implement. Also, we provide some services. Some of most important services is information for the end users about their authentication and information which IDP provides to service providers. So basically, we have MOI at eduHIR, status eduroam, installer eduroam, which is services to help the user to properly configure eduroam authentication. On the same time, we have the registry of all our service providers, so users are able to see who are legally service provider for our authentication and authorization infrastructure, what protocol they are used, and what attributes they are used for authentication and authorization. Also, for service providers and IDPs, we provide hosting services. So if you are not able if you are not technically, if you don't have technical resources for running IDPs or service provider things, you may use our hosting services. Another things from the beginning, where we start with authentication authorization in beginning of 20s, CARNES provide to all academic institution in Croatia computer equipment, so they have computer servers. And from that time, we provide Debian packages, which provide information for authentication, special configuration, and so on. We also support different authentication types, support other authentication other than AI at eduHire. Also, we monitoring authentication and authorization infrastructure, especially doing some statistics and reporting of usage, so that service provider and IDPs, identity provider, have information how many authentication is done on which services and what is rate of authentication or identity providers. Also, we participate in work of international working groups like GÉANT, REFITS, and so on. Continuously searching for new authentication technology and try to implement it our system. So basically, in last 2 years, we implement multi-factor authentication, OIDC. We are nearly to implement FIDO to web authentication, almost finished with ADFC. So continuously searching and try to implement new things. One most important things in authentication and authorization infrastructure is trust. Trust between identity providers and service providers. Without the trust, service providers wouldn't trust authentication data. Without the trust, identity provider wouldn't give the data needed for authentication and authorization. So how we ensure the trust? First of things, we give pre-configured packages and configuration for standard software implementation, like simple SAML PHP, Debian packages for AOSI, LDAP, and Radius, eduroam installer, and so on. Secondly, we have entities registry and authentication usage. Like I said, registry, register AI at edu.hr and my edu hire, which was showing first what the service provider are, and secondly, what service provider use for authentication and what authentication is done in what time. Also, we periodically run the audit for service provider and IDP provider. More information is on URL, which will show on the page. Also, on the same time, we have periodically outside audits from NIAS, basically from government authorization and authentication authorization infrastructure, to check if we provide enough trusted information to the other side. We learned some things on our journey from the beginning to today. First thing, you need the vision. The vision to implement authentication and stay with that vision, not today, not tomorrow, but stay with that vision a long time, in long period of time. Also, when you have the vision, you need constant review of existing solutions. When you decide to use Whois++, that was nice decision at that time, but 2 years after that, we found that LDAP is better solution. So you must check the new technology and see if that new technology better implement what you need. Founding, continuous and adequate. Money is needed for many things, and you must need the founding which give you possibility to work and research on that fields and implement new technology. Also, you will need one place for all information for authentication and authorization. Because if you have multiple places in that situation, you don't have enough enough trust from the service provider and IDP provider that you implement good things. So one place for all information is the best solution. Also, what we learned that some solutions don't scale well. So you have some implementation which will work for one institution, two institutions, maybe 5, but doesn't scale to 10 or 20. One more thing we learn is that users don't like complicated technology. Sometimes even one more additional click is big issue for the user. Sometimes I have a feeling that user would like to have authentication based on just look on the page and said I am authenticated. What we found that building trust between components in federation and outside federation. So our audit is well success and identity provider and service provider are happy to see that we check if both sides work correctly. Also, be inclusive. Many things may be solved very easily. One trust is established. Talk with your service provider. Talk with your IDP providers. We spent a lot of time talking with providers of educational library, and finally we decide both that we may agree about some authentication things which will be good for both of us, and that's work fine. Also, do monitor and statistics. Monitor your infrastructure to see how authentication is done. Do you have any errors? Or on some days you may see the large quantity for authentication. Sometimes application or service provider don't implement authentication on good manner, so you may correct that. Also, statistics is good because mostly your founder will ask you how authentication is gone, how many users you have, how many authentication per day. So statistics is very good to do. Okay, that is short presentation of our authentication and authentication authorization infrastructure. If you have questions, please put it on in chat or just ask.
Thank you, Dubravko, for your presentation. I think it was very useful for both users, but also I see that the majority of management of our Southeast European NRENs are already present at this meeting, so I think this will be also useful for them. And now we are at the point where I would like to engage you, the participants and the panelists, into our QA session, which will be led by our own Nicole Harris, Head of Trust and Identity Operations in GÉANT and one of the biggest federated identity advocates. Nicole, can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry, someone accidentally muted me, I think, but I can speak now. Hello, good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it was a pleasure to hear all of those presentations from our three presenters. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicole Harris. I'm Head of Trust and Identity Operations at GÉANT, and I've been involved in the TNI space for some time, including supporting the eduGAIN work, eduroam, and also through the ReFeds initiative, which has been mentioned several times today. So I'm going to host some Q&A for the next 30 minutes. So if anybody here has any questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat or to raise your hand, and we'll try and get to those. And if you think of things as we go along, please just jump in at any time and put those questions in the chat. But I have a few questions prepared for our speakers, first of all, to get us started. And I was going to start with Marina, because she's had more time to rest than the others. And thanks for that, really comprehensive overview, Marina, of where we are right now with the TNI space within GÉANT. I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, as you've been involved for quite a while now, what do you think has changed most significantly in the TNI space since we started on this journey on the early days of eduGAIN and eduroam? And is there anything that's coming up that's new or disruptive that you will think will fundamentally change how we're doing things?
Yes, thank you, Nicole. As you know, it has been quite of a journey. I think that, well, what we are changing is that we realized how important it is to make all of this seamlessly interoperate on a global level. There, we're still facing some challenges, and we have different ways to actually enable, well, the better trust flow in between all the entities and the better experience for the user. There are different things that are moving right now to do that, especially in the eduGAIN space, where we need to define a better baseline policies for globally participating identity and service providers in order to enable that better experience and flow for the end users. And I like to focus on that a little bit more. I think this is something that we as a community have realized, well, in recent years, is that with that proliferation of more and more and bigger international use cases, we need to make sure that what end users see and experience is, well, a journey and a flow for them, which is as seamless as possible and as disruptive as possible. And we hear in different forums that user experience is the first measure of success. And we need to keep that in mind and as a higher level strategy for us to make sure that we interoperate better at the global level. And I think we have a lot of movements actually going into that direction. Of course, we need more and more federations, more and more identity providers to join us, and GÉANT is there to support as much as possible with especially new coming and federations which are in the formative stage. We deliver trainings and support, and we're happy to share best practices. One good thing with the one who are in the formative is that we can jump over a lot of the learning that all the others had to do, and we can help you to land at the place which is, I think, currently known as what would be the best practice. Of course, one thing that we observed in all of the community also to be able to achieve that is that well, we need to make sure that all NRENs have proper support to do that. Running an identity federation is not a small job. It needs a dedicated team. As we heard from Cyprus, as we heard from Dubravko, there are a lot of actually services and supporting services that NRENs needs to provide to support institution in that space. Many institutions, especially the smaller ones, are not at the place where they're able to fully do everything that they need to with regards to doing the identity management, operating their identity providers, and certainly a lot of NRENs step in there to provide different kind of solutions and support, and to be able to do that, I think that we need NRENs needs to realize and, that it needs a dedicated and specialized staffing and a team of people to do that. And as Nicole knows, we have been also working a lot to raise the awareness around that and why having a trust and identity in NREN's portfolio next to network, as I said, as an enabler to access to any other services is important. So that was the first part of the question. For the second part, maybe what is coming next? And actually, there was an interesting question also in the chat, and it has to do with self-sovereign identities. This is a movement that we have been seeing in years globally, but also European Commission is picking up on that. So the movement is around, well, enabling different type of technologies and concepts to actually place the user at the spot where user owns their identity and their data, and they are the point that release that information about themselves to different service providers. There is a lot of going on in the space, both in industry. Some parts of our community started looking into that. There is an initiative in Europe, the EU Digital Wallet. There is the ESIF initiative as well. And we have realized that this is something which is very interesting and that may change or influence how we do identities in RNE. And this is something that we will definitely start looking at. And we want to also support that efforts from the GÉANT project. We are currently in the planning for the next phase, and this is something that we will be definitely looking at.
Thanks, Marina. And just one more question for you, if I may. Your presentation was obviously titled, "Why is it important that research and education is involved in these initiatives?" What would you say to someone who might say that with self-sovereign identities, with the widespread use of Google or Facebook identifiers, and the fact that users do have identities outside of education, is there really any space anymore for research and education to still be providing this to their students and to their staff, and why should they?
Yes,
question. Sorry.
Yes, this is an ever-evolving question as well, and thank you for asking that. There is a unique niche here, which actually only research and education institutions and the function that they can perform, because they're the one who can identify that the user is studying or working, a researcher is working in their institution. So they will always be the truth of information that carries the point that carries the information about affiliation of the user with that institution. Now we realize that the identification part and the login part may move to somewhere else. This is yet to be seen. Some of the sources you mentioned are definitely not as secure, like Google identities, typically self-asserted identities, if we talk about that. Some offer like EIDs, some can offer national EIDs, some can offer much better identity proofing than maybe some institutions are able to do. So there is definitely a place for synergy there. But I think there is a common view that there is a space for research and education institutions there, and this is that they're the only ones that can issue the information about affiliation of that particular user with the institution.
Thank you very much, Marina. And sort of following on from that, I wanted to come to Dubravko next and just ask a little bit more about the centralized model that was put in place in Croatia. As we know, there are many different ways you can support these kind of infrastructures. Many people have a mesh type environment where all of the work is sort of delegated out to the IDPs and the SPs, but you have this hub and spoke, this centralized style model. Why was that so important for you, Dubravko, in Croatia, and why did you feel that that met the needs of your members the best?
Basically, is the implementation and time. Using hub and spoke federation, you are able to have the fastest approach, less time to use to implement the authentication. That's one thing. Your IDP basically doesn't care about a lot of technology. They just use it what you said that is good. That is one thing we have in Croatia, mostly because we have opportunity to implement just technology we would like to use. Also, hub and spoke federation is good because all connection between service providers and identity providers is just in one place, and we are able to configure a response to service provider exactly on the way we would like to have. We don't have a lot of points where we need to configure something that service provider need to have. And also having hub and spoke, it's relatively good because when we connect to some other authentication and authorization infrastructure or some other service provider, we just do it from one place and we do it for all our community all together in one time.
Thank you very much, Dubravko. And then you talked a lot in your presentation about trust.
Yes.
Is that also part of the hub and spoke model, that support
Yes.
for that need to have that trusted element?
Yes, it's also important because when we're building the trust to the service provider on hub and spoke federation, basically you build the trust between one point to the service provider. For example, from AI and HR authentication point on one side, and on the other side, we build the trust from our federation point to the identity providers. So basically, you don't have the mesh when IDPs and SPs needs to build the trust between itself.
Thank you very much for that. So I wanted to jump across to Aristos now. You talked in your presentation about, I think, one of the big challenges that we all have, and that is the need to have skilled staff and the technical experience to be able to support this kind of development locally. How big a problem do you think this is for you in Cyprus? And do you think there's more as a community we could do to help with that skilling of staff?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Actually, we faced this lack of expertise in the trust and identity space, and we had to help. Relatively, Cyprus is a small country, so we had to help each institution so as to build its own IDP to be a member of the federation. This took us a bit of time, and I think it's widely spread that the knowledge we need to address this is mandatory. Some training was performed from Cynet to the institutions some years back, but I think it's a live environment, so maybe a wiki or something like live information in regarding to the updates of the identity, let's say, space would be very nice. But we've seen it in Cyprus, and we try to address it by training our staff in Cynet, and it took a little bit of time, but I think the result is satisfactory, taking into consideration that Cyprus is a small country in relation to other countries, and the institutions that participate in the federation. And Erasmus without paper project was the trigger to get more known about the eduGAIN, and as institutions join eduGAIN, they see the prospect of not only being for the Erasmus without paper, but for other services as well.
Thanks. And yeah, I think we hear that story a lot, that there needs to be this very important use case within a country to help move forward. So you clearly saw that within Cyprus with Erasmus without papers. Are there other services that people have found popular since coming on board, or that there's big demand for?
They are using some other services like Indico. We have several users using that, but it's not widely spread for the service in Cyprus. Some awareness, like Marina mentioned earlier, I think it's a good thing to have for the institutions.
Thank you very much. We have a hand raised from Anastas.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on this conversation on our speakers. The need, you mentioned the need for the big push. I think that in Cyprus the trigger was the Erasmus Plus. In Croatia it was the connection with the ministries and government services, as Dubravko mentioned. So everyone needed to have the eduID to apply for anything related to the ministry. Marina mentioned a lot of use cases. One of them I would like to really just to explain a little bit more for those not familiar with this was the Euro HPC use case. As Marina mentioned, two of these systems are actually here in the region, one in Slovenia, one in Bulgaria, or will be established. The Bulgarian was already inaugurated, so was the Slovenian one. Couple of weeks ago, I think, was already inaugurated. So for those that are not familiar with the concept of Euro HPC, the joint undertakings invests a lot in the hardware, which means that these purchases are done partly by national funding, but the other part is financed by the joint undertaking, meaning that these resources will be shared proportionally. So proportionally to the investment of the joint undertaking, these resources will be open to open calls to the researchers across the Europe. So this puts, I think, another push on the need for federated identities, that the access to these HPC systems, especially the ones we mentioned, we already have two in the region, will have to be somehow governed through this federated access. So just to complement what they already said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anastas. Yeah, that's such an important angle as well, the research support that's been going on. Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, please do raise your hand. If you think of one, please put questions in the chat. But whilst you're continuing to think, coming back to Marina, we've sort of talked a lot in your presentation and up to now about what we've done in the past. So what's next for you and in your planning? Because obviously we all know there's a big new phase of the GÉANT project coming up. What do you think the priorities are going to be there?
Sorry, to unmute myself. I didn't talk a lot about what GÉANT provides. I mentioned that GÉANT provides for the operations of the eduroam, the eduGAIN services. We have a few more services in the portfolio. I mentioned in Academia. There is also the eduTeams, which is a service that is directed, well, primarily to research infrastructures when they need to, on top of eduGAIN, manage membership and role information and connect different services of research infrastructures in a more streamlined way for them. So I think what is, well, always the priority for us is to continue delivering and operating those services. Of course, GÉANT does it with the help of funding from the GÉANT projects, the European Commission. We rely on our NREN partners who provide us the teams, the expertise and functions to deliver, to operate and develop those services. And there is always a place to improve on those practices. Now, I think that there will be a lot of movement that we see with eduGAIN coming. I mentioned before that we need to create a better baselines and policies for international interoperability. This is something that the community has been working on, and that is now formulated as a baseline that we need to take in and translate into what additional requirements this will bring into the participation on eduGAIN and drive and help federations and their entities to come that way. I think with eduroam, an interesting development is collaboration with open roaming, which should enable, basically the commercials are taking our approach and implementing that into the access of other commercial Wi-Fis. So we are collaborating with them to see how actually research and education identities used within eduroam couldn't be used for other Wi-Fi providers that are part of Open Roam Consortium. This would, of course, mean that our users, with using in the same way they use eduroam, they would be able to use other Wi-Fis, which would spread the reach of eduroam and the footprint of eduroam to much wider scope. And with the edu teams and in academia, those are our new services. We are there mostly working on the new deployments, the edu teams supporting more and more research infrastructures and communities to leverage and use research and education identities. As I mentioned before, those are very specific, sometimes niche cases, because we don't have a big driving vehicle that comes such as behind Erasmus, and now it's good there is also a driver for HPC, because there is a lot of investment made by European Commission and member countries. But to support researchers, which are typically spread over a lot of institutions globally, it's really important to continue supporting deployments such as with edu teams to enable them to access those research infrastructure and services. And of course, within academia, I mentioned before, this is our way to bring in commercial services in a more sustainable way, to offer a possibility for them to consume the information about affiliation of mostly students they're interested into, because they mostly have student offerings, but to do it in collaboration with the federations and to bring more value for them, and to enable this in the best way, in most privacy preserving way for the end users. And of course, we will continue to look at new things. We have a concept of the incubator in our projects, where we look at the new ideas. I mentioned SSI, digital wallets. This is something which is on the table for the GÉANT project to pick up and look at. We are planning right now. So I think we have a lot of interesting stuff and work to do in the coming years.
Lots to keep us busy, right? Thank you very much, Marina. And Aristos, you've talked about the beginning of the eduGAIN journey over in Cyprus. What are your priorities with relation to federated access and use of eduGAIN, say in the next couple of years for your members?
Yeah, actually, with our main priority is to list all the higher institutions. It's not a big number. It's only 32. We've seen that they lack some knowledge and the necessary equipment to do so. So our main priority is to address this, because the whitelist, I don't think, will be there for a long time. So they have to consider joining eduGAIN, so to have the Erasmus mobility program. Our next steps will be to have some awareness regarding the federated access, so to adapt even more services that the federated access delivers. And we are considering to have some, like Dubravko said, pre-configured packages to distribute for the eduGAIN, like the IDPs, because there is a planning for the Erasmus to have the mid-range, let's say, schools to participate in the Erasmus. So we have 600 more cases in there. So this will be a huge load of work for Cynet. And yeah, we're trying to find ways to automate the procedure, maybe an IDP as a service. We're considering this. We have been collaborating with one institution for the edu teams. They already deployed it and they're working on it. They use the Indico, one other institutions. Yeah, well, in this phase now, the environment is evolving, and we have to catch up to everything.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And yes, I've seen quite a few conversations, I think, recently about how we can extend our capacity and capability out to different groups in light of programs such as Erasmus. There's been several conversations. So I think that's going to be interesting for all of us. And then really the same question to Dubravko. You've obviously, you're one of the earliest federations to be up and running. You have a well-established service. So what's your priorities in the upcoming years in terms of maintaining and developing the services?
In upcoming years, we are looking for implementing something like digital wallets because our users expect something like that to have. Also, we have few IDs in Croatia. For example, you have one IDs for your for the government applications. You are able to use AI, but our services, but we don't have enough higher level of trust. So from some things you use identity cards, which have certificates on it. So we are looking for some digital wallets. Also, we are trying to implement a more automatic way for doing audit. Because right now we do audit for service provider and IDP providers once a year. It's partially automatic and partially we check some parameters by their own. So people do some checks and try to see if everything is work. But we would like to have some automatization system which will do audit basically all the times. So you are able to see if the IDP providers obey some rules or not, or they check something. On our audits, we found that some organization tried to just implement the rules on the way we do audit and then remove everything what they need to do after audit is finished. So just to be more precise, we try to automatic everything and said, okay, automatization is done, audit, and you are able to see if the institution is doing correctly just on this time. Just click on the web page, for example. That is two things we try to do right now, and also work on GÉANT projects and see if some new technology, new authentication mechanism arise, and we will try to see if we are able to implement it, because we would like that our users have a large portfolio of authentication mechanism to use, to able to authenticate to the service providers, because we have more and more service providers. We are not in educational space, more commercial one, which not always use the same technology for authentication. So we try to be to have, say, okay, if you will look for SAML authentication, we have SAML authentication. If you need OIDC, we have the OIDC implement. So that is some point for the future we would like to implement and see how they work.
Thank you, Dubravko. I think that example of audit is a really, brilliant example of something very practical that we have to think about as we operate these infrastructures for longer. How do we make sure that people are still committed to the standards, the specifications, the requirements? We've seen that within eduGAIN too. And as you say, how do we make sure they don't find a way around that in terms of how we implement audit? And as you said earlier, to ensure the trust framework that we're all working within. So I think that's a great practical example. I think we are pretty much on time now. So it's just up to me to say thank you very much to Marina, to Aristos, to Dubravko for their fantastic presentations. And I will hand back over to Anastas to close up this session.
Thank you, Nicole, for the excellent sharing, and thanks again for the speakers and the panelists for sharing their insight and different perspectives, different boosts, and different visions of what we expect from the trust and identity ecosystem. We are at the well-deserved break now. We'll keep it short, just 15 minutes. So we reconvene here back at 11:30 Central European Time. Thank you, everyone, and see you in 15 minutes. Okay, I think we are good to go. I hope you enjoyed the break and that we can continue with the last session for the Southeast European Forum. In this final session, in this hour plus, we will showcase some more interesting services and resources and best practices that might be helpful for you and your community. We will kick off with Mihajlo Savic from the University of Banja Luka, presenting us the remote sensing scene classification system. Mihajlo.
So, hi, hello. I hope everybody can hear me and see me clearly. My name is Mihajlo Savic. I come from Faculty of Electrical Engineering of University of Banja Luka. I represent also NIFOS Europe project here, and I will be presenting our efforts on grappling remote sensing scene classification system in a way that is compatible with open science approach. So basically, when we are talking about remote sensing and the neural networks, it is pretty much obvious and known by most of you probably that advances in deep neural networks aided rapid development of computer vision and scene recognition algorithms and uses in the recent years. Most of them are based on supervised learning approach, which basically needs that we are required to provide a huge number of correctly labeled images for neural network to train it, to allow it to establish the weights between the neurons so that it can provide, let's say, an acceptable level of classification accuracy. This labeling is time consuming and very error prone part of the process, and I will be showing some issues with it later on. After that, we can use transfer learning, or basically use networks of pre-trained models on large image sets, which are not the image sets that we are trying to classify, but it is shown that we can use them as a basic stepping stone and then fine tune or use on a smaller sets, because often we are in situations that we don't have 1 million or 10 million of photos that we can use to train our network, and we need to make it work somehow on several hundred or several thousand images. This transfer learning enables us to do exactly that. The problems with remote sensing are mostly tied to the information outside of visible spectrum, because most of the, for example, satellites produce multispectral images that use near infrared or ultraviolet or whatever parts of the spectrum, which are not normally visible by humans. And we have issues labeling such images in proper way because we are used to a visible spectrum. We are also using different images for training, and we cannot directly compare images produced by satellites and by, for example, small aircraft or automated drones, because satellite images are very specific. They can be shot at different angles. They can see clouds that are above basically drones when we are doing some surveys from smaller heights, etc., etc. So there are some issues with remote sensing, especially with aerial photos. And we have provided you here a system that can deal to a significant degree with such issues. One of the things that we are currently exploring, and which is partly implemented in this application, is a self-supervised learning, because we are engineers, and engineers by definition are lazy, and we try to automate everything that we can automate. So basically, we want to automate the process, and we also want to use the benefits that we can gain from non-RGB data, from the data that lies outside of the visible spectrum and is not basically something that we can employ humans to label. So we basically train the network to solve some pretext task. Labels can be obtained from directly, usually from data, and we then proceed with transfer learning. So what we do here is that we produce two benefits. We have avoided supervised learning step, which can be very time consuming in order to produce labeled images, and we can use large sets of multispectral images, which are also problematic for supervised learning sometimes. When we are talking about RSSC system, it was developed with support from VICIM and NIFOS Europe projects. It uses contrastive multi-view coding. It splits basically multispectral images into pairs of images and then analyzes the contrast between them. It works with pure RGB images as well, but one of the basic things that is an advantage of this system is that it can use multispectral images as well. It was trained on MLRS-net database, and it was tested with some other standard data sets in order to provide for a reference and comparison to other algorithms and systems. And details were published in a paper by Vojdan Kjorveziroski and Mehmet Mirat Satoglu in self-supervised learning and remote sensing scene representation using contrastive multi-view coding. So basically, what is the problem with most systems like this? Although you can fulfill the open science and open data checkmarks by just publishing the paper and providing the coding data, that is often not enough, because as most of you have probably found out in past, most developers of academic software will just say, hey, it works on my machine. It's not my problem that you cannot set up your environment exactly the way I want it to be set up in order for my algorithm or my program to work. So basically, we are trying not to just make our software and data open, but usable in practice as well, because we need to cover different classes of users and they have very different backgrounds and use cases. So when it comes to this, we have found out that we need to cover 4 main classes of users. And of course, they are not distinct. They are often overlapping, which complicates things even more, because we have researchers who are trying to develop our algorithms further, and they need paper code and data. Then you have a special class of researchers that just want to integrate this system into their existing workflow. And we are basically solving this with the use of containers. We will see a bit later on. Then we have researchers wanting to programmatically access the functionality, but don't want to integrate it or install it locally. So we need to provide some REST API service or something like that for them. And then you have researchers just who want to just use it via, let's say, nice, accessible, web-based user interface. So you need to provide functional web user interface for them as well. So in order to make it fully usable, we need to provide these 4 levels or types of use cases for our users. When it comes to architecture of the systems, we have settled on the 2 services. We have background service that does actual classification and tagging of images, which will be demonstrated shortly. And we have foreground service that provides web user interface and the REST API. In order to make it portable and to allow people to use it without having to install a bunch of software that we use here, we have created 2 containers with Docker. A background container is based on TensorFlow serving and provides very rudimental API, as well as actual classification and tagging of images, and foreground service, which is written in Python Flask, which provides for a nice web UI and RESTful API. In order to provide simple orchestration, we have provided Docker Compose, basically configuration file, which enables anyone with a good internet connectivity, because models are quite heavy, to simply install it with a single command line. If you are aiming for a more complex approach, as we are using Kubernetes to orchestrate our containers in production. So this is what the system looks like. And if there is interest, I will demonstrate it in live as well. Basically, you can choose images you want to classify or tag, or you can simply click on one of the 4 provided images. So you can simply, with no existing images, with no nothing, just see how the system works. So basically, when you try to classify an image, it will open an image and it will show you that it is classified as a rectangular farmland with 98% or with circular farmland with 1%. Others are under 1% and not shown here because they are not interesting to us. You can also try clicking on other examples, and you can see that here this image was classified as medium residential, which is medium density residential area. It has identified it partly as a parking lot and mobile home park because it looks like a mobile home park to the classifier. You can also choose not to classify an image because classification can also be very tricky. And this is one of the problems with labeling. It is often the case that we as human beings cannot actually classify images correctly into just one class because it is obviously a member of more than one classes. But we are here trying to force our network to classify it as a single class or to provide us with a single solution, or in this case, several solutions, but we wanted to assign weights to those solutions. An alternative is to just tag the image. And in this case, our web user interface will show you the most important tags that are assigned to an image, but this is not an exhaustive list of tags that is assigned to an image. So basically, if we use tagging on the previous photo that shows aerial image of some medium residential area, we will see that our algorithm has identified trees, grass, building, pavement, cars, bare soil, etc., etc., and with very high percentages as well. When we try to classify, for example, something that is obviously a bridge, it will be classified as a bridge, but it will be also tagged as a bridge, water, because there is obviously water, there are some trees, there is a road as a part of the bridge, there are some buildings adjacent to a bridge, there are cars on the bridge, pavement, grass, ships, there are ships in the water, bare soil, etc., etc. So basically, depending on what you are trying to do, you can either classify the image or you can provide the information about what the classifier has found in your provided image. When it comes to Kubernetes, we wanted to use a technology that would be in wide use and that would be fairly simple for end users to use. And there are many Kubernetes providers, from Google to Microsoft to Amazon to basically anybody who is providing you any type of cloud services will also provide you some kind of Kubernetes engine. And since the most of the work computationally is performed by neural network container, and the classification and tagging are fairly time constant per image, unless you are uploading very large images, etc. But that is not basically computational time. Containers are independent and stateless by design, and simple scalability by increasing the number of containers and load balancing can be achieved, and it scales basically linearly. Front end can be used as a load balancer, or they can share the same pod in Kubernetes lingo. It can use ingress or other existing load balances, but even for simple solutions, having one front that then simply round robin assigns work to backend containers has proven very effective in our use case. So basically, for our future work, we are working on auto scalability, so we can dynamically increase or decrease the number of containers or pods that are doing actual classification and tagging work. And we are basically in the middle of implementing a messaging middleware between them in order to make it easier to integrate into some other specific workflows and to make some other use cases possible as well. So basically, in conclusion, so remote sensing is an important use of neural networks, and the problems are mostly used for self-supervised learning, and we want to automate the process and make full use of multispectral imaging. We absolutely need open science approach because none of what was explained in previous slides would be possible without open science and open source and open data approaches, because everything that's been produced here is open source. It's also using other open source tools. It is using open data sets for training. It is producing open data sets as labeled images, etc., etc. And none of this would at all be possible for us in Banja Luka, as we are not a part of some huge center that can spend billions of CPU hours on supervised learning or self-supervised learning without the existence of open data sets that we can then use, adapt, and fine tune for our needs. There is also need to make outputs both user-friendly and exploitable in different use cases, because just making something open source does not make it usable for other people. So our accent is on making it easily usable for others. And the containers and orchestration frameworks can obviously help researchers. So I will just shortly show something. For example, this is the current user interface, and we can use some photos from a different data set to test how it works, and we can submit it for task, which is classification basically. And it will classify. And since all images that we have uploaded are dense residential classified in this other model, we can see that it is always very certain that this is dense residential area. But you can see that it is quite certain that this image is a harbor, 99%, not dense residential. And if you take a close look at the image, you will see that it does contain residential buildings, but it also contains a large number of ships or small scale boats and some small piers, etc., around the houses. And you can basically see why the classifier was confused. Where confused is basically in quotation marks, because if I was given a task to classify this image, I would also say that this is most likely a harbor because of the large number of ships and small boats. You can also see that it has classified some other image as dense residential, but also partly a harbor, partly an island, mobile home park, or even a palace, because it has a very specific shape, etc., etc. So this is something that we also always have to take into account, because if we basically use the same images and just use it for tagging, we can see that the same images were tagged by trees, pavements, buildings, roads, cars, dense residential area, grass, water, swimming pool, because there are swimming pools in the image, etc., etc. And we always have to be very careful not to rely too heavily on simple classification into one class. And we should always take into consideration that most of the models are trained according to labels provided by humans, and to err is human. So basically, we need to take very good care of what are actually outputs of our algorithms, especially when we are doing deep neural networks. So basically, that is my presentation. I have tried to keep it very short in order not to break the time. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Mihajlo. Thank you. Please stick around for the questions even after we end the other presentations. I don't see any at the moment. Thank you for the enthusiastic presentation and for pointing out that there are many different ways to share. It's not always simple. The sharing is not always one way, and it's not always simple. That's a good point that we need to get from this presentation. Next, we have our young colleague Vojdan Kjorveziroski from UKIM, who will demonstrate us the importance of AI for open science generic service offerings. Vojdan.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. Hi, my name is Vojdan Kjorveziroski, and yes, today we will talk about leveraging centralized AI for access to research resources. So the agenda for this brief talk today is to first give an introduction to what is Finky Cloud, a production service that is hosted at UKIM. And then we'll set the stage for the need for a centralized computing infrastructure, both locally in our country, but as well in the wider region. And then we'll start talking about an issue that we have faced, mainly the challenge of opening up the service to external users. And finally, we will discuss how we have solved this challenge by integrating with the NIFOS authentication and authorization infrastructure, and how this integration has helped us to better integrate our service into the wider EOSC European Open Science Cloud ecosystem. So Finky Cloud is an infrastructure as a service product, which is hosted at the Faculty of Computer Science and Engineering based at UKIM. And Finky Cloud is a production service of ours since 2019. The main idea behind Thinky Cloud was to basically allow easy access to virtual resources to the research and education community. By virtual resources, we mainly think virtual machines as well as storage space and secure networking. So the main benefits of Thinky Cloud are that it is fast. That means that our aim was to enable fast deployment of virtual resources in a matter of minutes, so that potential users would not have to spend their time waiting. Thinky Cloud is also secure because we enforce strict isolation between the various users by default. However, we do recognize that one major feature is for the option of sharing access between multiple researchers and thus for fostering collaboration between them and between various different research teams, as well as Thinky Cloud is familiar because it offers an intuitive web interface for new users, but also for existing users that might have some prior experience with using cloud products. Finally, Thinky Cloud is easy to use because we offer a very simple UI user interface without any need for command line interaction or something like that. But of course, advanced users, if they do think that they need command line access for more advanced setups, we do provide command line access as well. And finally, the question of data sovereignty also comes up. Users can rest assured that all of the data that is provided to Thinky Cloud remains at on-premise at the Faculty of Computer Science and Engineering, and this is of course very important in some aspects when data that is sensitive is provided to the cloud. So the driving ideas behind implementing this service was not only to offer this infrastructure to the researchers within the faculty, but also to be able to extend this to outside users. So mainly to act as some sort of a computing hub for local and regional researchers as well, and in this way to foster collaboration between them. Of course, the main aim is to provide a cost-effective way for these researchers and to support the long tail of science. The first problem that we had once we have established Thinky Cloud was how to actually provide integrated way of accessing Thinky Cloud to others, how we can share this platform with outside users. The first solution that we have come up with was to integrate with our identity provider, with our university identity provider. And of course, this only partially solved our problem because now we only support users that are directly affiliated with our university. But of course, our idea was larger. We wanted to give also independent researchers, which might not be affiliated with any other organization, access, or also other researchers which might not even be from our country. So how we could solve this problem was to either integrate with other identity providers that are part of different institutions one by one. But of course, this is not a feasible approach, and it would pose a significant burden to the administrative team. And another solution would be to simply find some abstraction layer which would deal with the communication with the other identity providers. So what we needed was, of course, an AI infrastructure or authentication and authorization for short. There were previously brilliant presentations regarding this topic, so I would just briefly state what were the benefits that we have used from this authentication and authorization infrastructure. So mainly we wanted to have an abstraction layer between our service and the necessary other identity providers that are part of various institutions. And we also wanted to provide users not only with the option of using their institutional login, but also, of course, to support independent researchers, for example, by using social login. In this way, basically, we provide a form of bring your own identity towards end users. We have chosen NIFOS AI, or the NIFOS authentication and authorization infrastructure, as the solution to our problems. NIFOS AI is part of the NIFOS project, and we have integrated with NIFOS AI using the SAML protocol. And basically now, with this integration, we can define separate so-called virtual organizations, or we can simply state virtual groups within NIFOS AI. And by using these virtual organizations or virtual groups of users, we can restrict access to our service. So the idea is that not everyone is simply allowed by default to access the service. Instead, they have to reapply and justify their need for accessing the service. This is, of course, to ensure the integrity of the service itself and to prevent any abuse. Once the application has been reviewed and it has been accepted, then users are made part of the Finky Cloud virtual organization, and they're given full access to the service. This access is relevant for up to 1 year, after which, of course, the users are free to reapply if they deem that they require access for longer. In this way, by integrating with the NIFOS AI and by allowing us to support many different identity providers at once, we have greatly improved the accessibility of our service, because now we have met our goal. We can support any local, but as well regional or even international researchers, and we can provide access to them to Finky Cloud. In this way, we also foster collaboration and cooperation between various institutions, because now the different researchers can simply use Finky Cloud as a shared space. So the benefits that we have acquired as a service, but also the general benefits of any service integration with a central AI, is that we now support user mobility and collaboration. We support a wide range of users that can access the service. And of course, this access in a privacy and security preserving manner. Users no longer have to create separate accounts. And from the perspective of our service, we do not even deal with storing their private credentials. Instead, we only use the information that has been passed to us from their identity providers. This greatly improves the user experience from the user perspective, because they do not have to register, remember new credentials, and so on. They can simply instead use their existing identity within their organization. From the service perspective, or from our perspective as developers of the service, this also has rapidly increased decreased the time that we require for publishing the service and making it available towards the other users, because now we do not have to integrate all of the other identity providers by hand, and it has allowed us to more easily promote the service among other different communities, international and regional communities. So all of this, if we take all of this and see some pictures, the main idea is that once the user visits the Finky Cloud homepage, then they're asked to choose their authentication method that they would like to use. Once they select the NIFOS AI, they're automatically redirected to the NIFOS AI homepage, where they can choose their home institution from the institutions that are onboarded within the NIFOS AI Federation. And of course, if not, then they can simply choose to use their social accounts, for example, Facebook, Google, or GitHub. Once they have been authenticated by their institution, then they have the option to send a request to join the virtual Finky Cloud organization. And all of that that is needed is simply to give a very brief description of how they would like to use the service, in this way justifying their request. All other fields in this form are pre-populated because we can fetch the information from the identity provider itself. such as the first name, last name, affiliation, and so on. Should this application be accepted, then upon the next login, all of these steps are simply bypassed, and the user is simply redirected to the internal homepage of Pinky Cloud, where they can manage their private resources. Of course, these resources are private to the researchers that has been granted access, but upon a demand, they can choose to share this space with others so that they can together collaborate or share access to various different virtual resources. So to sum up, we have received a great value by integrating with the Nifos AI, and it allowed us to promote our service on many new different levels, and to implement even additional features. Because now all of the approval workflow for new users is completely external to the service, and it's completely transparent to the service. A new user account is created within Pinky Cloud only once the user has been accepted into the virtual organization. And we also support now social login, mainly allowing us to meet our goal of allowing independent researchers, which are part of the long tail of science, to access high performance computing resources. Finally, by allowing such a central authentication method, we can also, and we are also promoting our service into the wider EOSC community. We currently have submitted, and it has been accepted, this part of the Nifos catalog. I have provided a link, but also in the future, it is planned to onboard this service into the EOSC catalog as well. So that would be all for today. If there are any questions later, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Vojdan, for showing us a real use case of the how to leverage the usefulness of the AI. And now I hope that the participants have much better idea how this AI is used. We continue now with our dear colleague Mehmet Mirat Satoglu, the director of the Turkish NREN, who will present the Turkish success story on the development of national open access library infrastructure. Mehmet.
Thank you, Anastas. Let me start with sharing my presentation, but I also would like to say thank you to Marina, Anastas, and all our presenters for the program. I've benefited immensely, and I hope it has been beneficial to all the participants. I'll be talking about our open science infrastructure and how we actually connect with our identity federations, especially with the new eduGAIN in place. Just want to introduce TUBITAK ULAKBIM. TUBITAK is the main research funding body in Turkey, with more than 20 different research institutes, over 3,000 researchers in various fields. But TUBITAK ULAKBIM is specifically tasked with providing e-research infrastructures to researchers and universities. We are an NREN, but we are also an HPC center and an information center all in one, with roughly around 150 people. We are for open source as well as open access and open science since we have been established 25 years ago, actually. With our network department, we have the academic network and our high performance computing center. And we also operate an OpenStack based cloud. And we have an information center, roughly about 50 librarians working on collection development, journal park, document supply, TR index, as well as other services. And we also have smart boards and our own Debian-based Linux distro as part of our education technologies department. Dergi Park, as we call it, and literally translates as Journal Park, has been in service since 2013. It has been started as an open journal systems-based editorial management system and open access hosting. Right now, it's hosting over 2,000 journals, 500,000 articles, and it's one of the leading sites in Turkey, actually. We have more than 160 million visits in 2021, and we are gonna be approaching 200 million by end of the year, it seems like. It keeps growing by more than 80,000 articles each year, and it's integrated with OpenAir, Google Scholar, EBSCO, and several other services. You can see how the stats go up. We have nearly 500,000 users registered on the site and more than 500,000, 530,000 articles, and keeps growing fast. It is integrated with Crossref for providing DOI service and cited by service, as well as other integrations that is available. We also operate a Turkish index, and this is a very similar Web of Science criteria index of Turkish academic journals. And it goes all the way back to 1963. One of the first things TÜBİTAK started doing at the time of its founding. And 80% of articles are full text. Some older articles from 90s are not, and we are looking into ways to actually find and digitize them. And hopefully we can open most of them. And it has more than 10 million references in the database, and it's able to calculate impact factor, self-citations, most cited articles, and similar bibliometric indicators for journals. We expect journals in Turkey, academic journals with peer review mechanism, to start with Journal Park if they need any help hosting and editorial management software, and then qualify for TR index and move on to international databases afterwards. Another very popular service we have is our national catalog. Our national catalog is indexing more than 200 university libraries. It's for academic libraries, actually, as well as some national libraries, but not your regular public library. It has a separate national catalog by itself. Our collection has more than 31 million records, and it has 13 million unique records. And some old records, as you know, do not have ISSN, ISBN information. So we have our own method that is developed over time to include it. For over 200 libraries, we actually have 584 branches of those libraries, and it is incredibly useful with more than 5 million visits annually. These are the services we actually had before our open science policy, and after that, by March 2019, we actually have adopted open science policy for the main TÜBİTAK, and it has been a very influential policy in terms of open science adoption in Turkey. We still embrace green open access method instead of gold open access or bronze open access right now, but we have diamond open access, as you have seen on Journal Park and TR Index. Current open science policy has strong recommendations on research data, but there are no mandatory requirements. It's an encouragement to actually host research data and to actually submit data management plans, but we are hoping that we'll be actually tightening the language on that part by next year. TUBITAK has an institutional repository, and it's also operating as a research data management system for all the researchers in Turkey. This space is very popular in Turkey with more than 150 installations, I believe, but we opted for invenio because we could actually have our own repository plus research data management with single invenio installation. This is very similar to Zenodo. We have 55,000 plus articles with some data sets. We had some COVID-related data sets shared, but we are hoping it's going to be much more bigger by next year. There will be bilingual support, and there is a team at CERN developing the next version of invenio, and we are part of the team supporting and working on internationalization part of the software as well. We also have our harvester. This is called Turkey Academic Archive, and it's harvesting 154 institutional repositories in Turkey currently, with 2.1 million articles. This is the previous one, Aperta, is based on Zenodo, and this one is based on OpenAir. And it is harvested by OpenAir as well as, I believe, Google. Now, as I mentioned, we actually started requiring data management plans for all grant applications as of 2021. Now, this is a data management plan requirement to submit how you will manage your data, but we don't have data management requirements or we don't have embargo requirements for sharing your data right now. But this was a big step, and it actually increased awareness a lot in the researcher community in Turkey. The DMP tool was our solution with this requirement. When we required as TUBITAK that all grant applications need to submit their data management plans, we actually provided them a solution, a DMP tool installation with its translation to Turkish as well. It integrates with ARVIS, the grant application portal, and it integrates with our research data management portal, Aperta, that I just mentioned. For all of this information, actually, we actually created not just one open science education site, but several others. And this is one that is modeled after Foster project in EU. This has a lot of information about how to handle open data, what to do, how to share, and how to classify and version the data. So we provide information. Because of pandemic, we couldn't host face-to-face trainings, but we actually had online events. So we'll be doing more and more of that to increase adoption of open data and research data management practices. And another one is our open courseware platform. This is not for all universities. Most universities have developed their solutions, and some of them already had their open courseware system in place before the pandemic. This is specifically for open science, open access, research data management, research ethics, and so on and so forth. This is our own open courseware platform, if you will. Now on to identity providers. Our services actually connect to 3 different identity providers. One is the red one, is the e-government. 2 of our services are already integrated with e-government, but you also can integrate with ARVIS. This is a grant application portal, and it also serves as an IDP for us. Now we are working on integrating our DMP tool and Aperta with ARVIS, and ARVIS is already integrated with e-government. So you can actually use register as a user on Arbis, or you can use your e-government ID to actually start your grant application. And you can use either option for Dergi Park and TR Index. However, we actually have a new player. It's a game changer, actually. This is eduGAIN and UKIM. Marina mentioned this, covered in the first presentation today, and I benefited a lot from her presentation. We actually had eduGAIN with just ULAKBIM as the member of Turkish Federation for nearly 10 years. And as of 2019, one other university adopted the system. But now we actually have more than 80 universities. We actually have nearly 80 universities. I just checked this morning, and I've seen happily the 78 university live today. Nearly 50 in test, and we have about 20 universities on the whitelist. They are very small institutions. So it's the new game changer, and we are actually gonna start offering drive and video conference on top of it. We had Elsevier and ACS as academic collections, and we actually have file sender installed at ULAKBIM for universities to use, and that's integrated. But as Marina mentioned, most universities have their easy proxy or a similar solution in place, so they have not integrated until the Erasmus requirements actually really created a huge incentive for them to join. It's a very big thing. We are hoping the federation in Turkey will grow as big as 190 universities possibly. And that's nearly 3.5 million researchers. That's quite a big federation. We are a member of GÉANT, of course, and we provide eduroam, eduGAIN, and we are also a member of Open Science, European Open Science Cloud. With all our infrastructure, we are very excited and positioned for open science, and we are looking forward to an exciting future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mehmet, for this impressive talk. You are setting an excellent examples for all of us in the region how we should proceed toward the development of open science. Please stick around for the question and answers a little after the last presentation. And last but not least, our colleague from the University of Montenegro, Žarko Zečević, will show us the open source application for automatic image mosaicing georeferencing. Žarko.
Thank you, Anastas. Hello to everyone. My name is Žarko Zečević, and I will present OMAP, open source application for automatic image mosaicing and georeferencing. OMAP is open source, open mapping application that could find application in precision agriculture. Namely, in precision agriculture, the acquisition of precise and timely information about crop condition during the season is of crucial importance. For example, aerial color and spectral images can provide spatial and spectrally derived terrain parameters that can be used in different applications. Current satellite imagery has limited application in agriculture due to low spatial and spectral resolution and a larger visit time. Images taken by planes are detailed enough, but this type of acquisition is usually expensive and also impractical. On the other side, unmanned air vehicles or drones are more practical. And if drones flies enough close to the ground, it can provide higher resolution, even with 2 centimeters per pixels. Since drones fly at low altitudes, typically below 100 meters. In order to cover reasonable size area, they need to take about thousands of photos, and all of these photos need to be stitched and lined together in order to provide unified field, unified image. The process of stitching images is called mosaicing, and the process of assigning for real geographical coordinates to each pixel is called georeferencing. There are many desktop solutions that can be used for automatic image mosaicing and georeferencing. However, all these tools are expensive and require a considerable memory, processor, and storage resources. For this reason, our aim was to develop a cloud application or our own web service that will be executed in cloud environment. Here we have the web address of this service. I will show how it looks like at the end of presentation. OMAP is a multi-user platform. It is very simple for users. Each user only need to provide some basic information such as name of map, the descriptions, type of visibility. Each map can be public or private, and upload the images. After the processing is finished, all users are notified by email. Also, all finished map can be previewed via web interface. OMAP is designed, is built by using all open source tools. For example, on server side, for image processing, it uses OpenDrawMap. This is the main tool that used for image processing. Also, some post-processing scripts are written by using Python and GDL libraries. On the other side, web interface is designed in Laravel and Vue, while maps are previewed by using Leaflet, JavaScript library. As I said before, all user can preview finished map by using web interface. Also, all public maps can be embedded in external web projects by using this HTML code. Here, this red numbers represents a unique IP key that is associated with each map. Also, each user can download the processed imagery. For example, the mosaic and the georeferenced image is available in GeoTIFF format. Also, there are available digital information map. OMAP also provides some 3D outputs, such as a texture 3D model. This model are basically reconstructed by using uploaded images. It should be known that all these data sets are saved in open formats, open data formats, and they are compatible with standard open source GIS tools such QGIS or some software for previewing 3D outputs like 3D models like Cloud Compare or Mesh Lab. Here on this image we have a global outline of OMAP. As I said before, all images are uploaded via web interface, and all processing is performed in cloud resources of University of Montenegro. Currently, the user web interface and image processing tools are hosted on the same machine. Virtual machine use 20 megabytes of RAM, 12 cores each of at 2.9 gigahertz and 500 gigabyte storage. All of these resources can be easily extended if the needs arises. It should be noted that all image processes are sent to the queue, and one image project is processed at one time. Well, in some future releases of this service, we will separate user interface and processing nodes, and also we will consider usage of more than one or multiple nodes for image processing. But for now, we don't have many users, and this is not necessary yet. Also, the storage represents the bottleneck. For these reasons, after a few weeks, all uploaded images and processed outputs are removed from the server, while only the maps are kept, so they can be previewed via the web interface. Here we have some potential application of map. For example, in precision agriculture, these maps can be used for crop classification or crop condition monitoring, water stress detection, or for example, in some environmental protection application, we can use maps for national parks and forests monitoring, plant and animal species detection, or for example, in cultural heritage digitalization for 3D object reconstruction. In order to show the effectiveness of processing images on the cloud, we made some comparison with other solutions for mapping solutions. In comparison, we used UKIM soft photo scan, which is desktop software, and another cloud-based solution, Maps Made Easy. We provide two examples. In first example, we use 65 images, and in another example, we used 118 images. As can be seen, all map servers provide the smallest processing time, which is in first example about 10 minutes, and in the second example 35 minutes. It is also, it can be seen that the processing time of all map is the shortest. In the first example, Maps Made Easy need about 1 hour, and PhotoScan need about 3 hours for processing of final maps. While in the second example, the processing times of Maps Made Easy and PhotoScan are much larger than OMAP. Here on this slide, we have some examples of OMAP outputs. For example, this first map represents georeference map, which is shown over the Google Earth. As it can be seen, there is a good overlap of our maps with Google Maps. On the other side below, second map shows vegetation index. This map basically is obtained by processing the first RGBI map. And this third image, this represents a 3D model of which is reconstructed by using uploaded images. In this example, we use 41 images, and all images are taken at the altitude of 100 meters. Second example is similar. The difference is that in this example we use more images, and all images are taken at lower altitude of 15 meters. Also, it can be seen that we have a good overlap with Google Maps. I will show now how web interface looks like. So I must share all screen. As I said before, the web addresses omap ucg at ac.me. User interface on home page, we can view some public maps. Also, each user can access own maps by clicking on dashboard. Here we have all maps for each user. For example, on the left side and on the right side, we have the maps that are currently processing. For example, I can show how. Here is the same example as which was shown on presentation. First map is standard RGBI map. For example, if we want to show a Vari map, we click on this button, or 3D map can be previewed by clicking on this button. But 3D models are slower. Also, each user have possibility to download all of these outputs in some of standard formats, or use this HTML code to embed the project, this map in external project. That would be all for me. Maybe I be faster.
Thank you, Žarko, for keeping it in time and for very interesting presentation. I will ask now our last 4 presenters to join me in the final Q&A to see if there are any questions from the audience. I'm trying to see the chat and I don't see any questions. If I don't see any questions, then I will ask the same question all 4 of you. It has nothing to do with your presentations. It has to do with your impression of this event. Since you are already in the spotlight, you will have the chance first to show us, to tell us how do you like this format? How do you like this event? What will you pick up and take with you from this event? So, Mihajlo, I will go in order of presentations. Mihajlo. Yeah.
Thank you. I was not able to unmute myself. So these events are useful for us so we can see what other people are basically doing, and we can find maybe interesting ways to cooperate. For example, this last presentation by Žarko is very interesting to us because, as I have presented before, we do classification of aerial images. And basically, by tying together these 2 applications, you could produce, for example, an annotated 3D model that has additional data which is not usually present in 3D reconstructed models of, for example, terrain. So basically, we could have a 3D model that is also annotated to include that this part is a road, this part is a residential area, this is a bridge, etc., etc. So there is a lot of possibilities for better cooperation and basically for tying together multiple tools, because, and this is a good thing because we are using open data and open source tools, so we can collaborate much more easily than if we were from 2 different companies and we would have to consider very complicated issues of intellectual properties and licensing and whatnot. Since we are doing open science, we already use open source licenses. This is something that is basically already solvable, especially since in the project we already have a license clearing tool, etc., etc. So this could be a nice example how we can cooperate cross-border and across different areas and produce something which is basically unique, as far as I know.
Thank you. So collaboration and complementing research, I can pick up from your talk. Vojdan, the same question goes to you.
Thank you. Well, yes, just to reiterate what Mihajlo said, yes, these events are very useful indeed. The highlight for me today was, of course, this second day where we talked more about the authentication infrastructure and just to see the progress that others have done in the region and to serve as a further inspiration on what to focus on next. Of course, I would like to compliment Marina's talk, which was very insightful and provided a lot of new information, but also the talk by Mehmet and their advanced infrastructure that they had was also very inspiring. What I also liked about this event was that it was had a very nice organization. Mainly the first part of today was the focus on the identity aspect, on the identity providers, before then focusing on the service providers in the second part. So we had a chance to look at both sides, both from the infrastructure aspect, from the identity providers, but also the end services that are available for end users to use, and also the new possibilities that they offer for regional cooperation, something which is of course very important in our region.
Thank you, Vojdan. Mehmet.
So I actually learned a lot, and I'm also this is part of our Southeast Europe directors meeting, that how to increase collaboration. So I hope these kind of events will actually lead to learning and also more collaboration. The research environment and NREN domain is changing fast, and there are new services. We are not just providing connectivity anymore. AAI and identity federations, eduroam, eduGAIN, Open Science, European Open Science Cloud, all of these are changing how we work, and we have to actually adapt fast. So these kind of events help a lot to actually do the transition and learn from each other so that we can actually share experiences. As you have seen, we actually use a lot of open source software to actually do these services. So if as the old days, we actually would opt for building the software ourselves or purchasing them, it would be a lot harder. Maybe we would be behind by 2 services and have them on our roadmap for later. But this experience and sharing of codes and learning helps a lot. So that's how we start our services. And we are in the middle of a very important transition. So I see these very helpful. We actually have to find other ways to collaborate, not other ways, but towards the same goal, towards dissemination of open science practices and adoption of open science practices. And this is part of our discussions, but all our users and communities are welcome to actually pitch in their ideas and start collaborating.
Thank you, Mehmet, for the nice word. And finally, Žarko, nice to see you, at least at the end. What's your thought on this event?
Yeah, as Mihajlo said, it is useful to see what other people works and share experiences. For example, for me, his presentation was interesting for the reason they also working with processing maps. Also, Vojdan presentation is also it was interesting because our service zone map now we use our users on have usernames or registration which is username that are saved in our database, but we are planning to provide some other types of not registration, authentication. Sorry, English wasn't never was my better side.
Sorry, you conveyed the message.
But I understood all of you but when I'm speaking, it's not very good.
Thank you, Žarko, and thanks all of you once again, which brings us to the end of this two-day regional event. We all hope that you enjoyed the presentation, gained new insight about open science, about collaboration, about supporting infrastructure, services, etc. And we expect that you will reach out to your NREN in support for accessing and utilizing the possibilities that the EOSC has to offer. Please don't forget to help learn us from this event too. We will share via email and now in the chat a link for the event feedback survey that we would like to ask you to fill in so we can make the next event even better and more useful for you. And we hope that the next one will be actually physically placed somewhere in the region, hosted by one of your NRENs, and we will see many more of you engaging in the pan-European research and education community. At the end, I want to thank all the speakers, all the moderators of this event for sharing with us their experience. I also want to give a big hand of applause to the whole team who worked really hard on this event to happen. Marina De Georgi, Rosanna Norman, Annabel Grant, Laura Ruggeri, Leonardo Marino, Nabil Ashraf, all from GÉANT, all the representatives from NIFOS Europe and EOSC Future projects, RCC, WB6 Digital Summit, but most of all, thank to you, dear participants who dedicated the time to be present at this event. See you all next time, hopefully face to face. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.